on your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 6 o'clock, a couple have been found guilty of gross negligence manslaughter after going on the run with their newborn baby. 38-year-old Constance Martin and Mark Gordon, who's 51, were trying to evade authorities and avoid them taking Victoria into care. It meant she was kept in a tent in freezing January conditions. Detective Superintendent Lewis Basford from London's Met Police led the search.
Victoria's death was completely avoidable. The couple had plenty of opportunities to do the right thing and come forward to ask for help. They also ignored medical professionals who directly reached out to them to say that their actions were putting baby Victoria at risk.
Donald Trump has threatened Russia with 100% tariffs if it doesn't reach a ceasefire deal with Ukraine within 50 days. The US president says he's very unhappy with Vladimir Putin. Greg Wallace says he didn't intend to harm or humiliate anyone after 45 complaints were upheld against him. He stepped down from MasterChef last year while an investigation took place. And England's cricketers have beaten India by 22 runs in the third test at Lord's. It put the hosts 2-1 up in the series with 2 matches to go. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 56 points at a record high of 89.98. The pound buys $1.34 and €1.15. LBC weather becoming dry tonight in many eastern and southern areas. Some showers lingering in parts of western Britain. Lows of 8 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. A little less sticky tonight, but after the last few broiling days, we can already see the shapes of a modern British summer. The doughty spectators who'd so longed to be there keeling over at Wimbledon and Lord's. The hosepipe bands in Kent, Yorkshire and Sussex. Trains conking out. Warnings of coming thunderstorms. And, of course, Ed Miliband telling us it's all down to global warming.
Mr. Speaker, the science is unequivocal about why this is happening. As the Met Office said this morning, and I quote, "This is not a natural variation in our climate. Human emissions of greenhouse gases are warming the atmosphere and changing the weather we experience."
Well, it wouldn't be summer without Ed. He isn't perhaps the most popular message bringer in the country. Trouble is, folks, he's right. Or put it another way, if the world was being affected by global warming, we would expect to see a series of hotter summers than ever. Heavier downpours, higher sea levels. Well, check, check, check. The first two, the scorching heat and the drenching rain, are not realities I think I need to persuade you about. But a report by scientists at the Met Office found the number of very hot days had quadrupled this decade compared with the previous 30 years. On the third, the report says that average sea levels have risen by 13 centimetres since 1993. It's slow, but the day will come when we notice that too. Anyway, the most important thing now is how we change our behaviour to deal with, in this case, much hotter summers. Why aren't there grants for air conditioning as well as for heat pumps? Why don't we start to use heavy wooden shutters on older homes, like the French and the Italians do? Where are the council cooling areas to help older people who are struggling? Why don't we start to collect and pipe water from the wetter west of the country to the increasingly drier east? Let's kick off with Julia King, Baroness Brown, who chairs the Climate Change Adaptation Committee. What, I wondered, is the priority?
Well, given where we are at the moment, one of the things we've recommended to government is that we need a heat strategy. We do have a flood and coastal erosion management strategy, which the Environment Agency produce every few years, but we don't have a heat strategy, and heat affects every government department. Yes, it affects farming. It can reduce farm output, particularly if it's associated with drought, but actually it affects
railways
every
and
building.
roads. And
who hasn't been to a meeting in the last few days where somebody's turned up late because the railway system couldn't cope with the heat? Absolutely. So we need, right across government, we need people to be thinking about how do we manage this heat that we've got today, of which we will be getting more, because the Met Office has told us that its modelling suggests that in the next 12 years there's a 50-50 chance we're going to see 40-degree sea temperatures again in the summer, and indeed there's a chance they could be significantly higher than that. So we absolutely need to be prepared.
When I've been talking to friends and family, everybody is rushing to those relatively few places around London, I'm talking about, which have air conditioning. Most places, most flats in Britain don't have air conditioning. Do you think air conditioning, therefore, needs to be a big part of that?
I think we've got to be very careful with air conditioning because, of course, it's an additional load on the electricity system. So it means that we'll need more of our low-carbon electricity system, so that's more investment. But I do think in cities in the southeast, like London, there will be some places where better shading, potentially shutters, better ventilation may not be enough. And so thinking about how you help those people, air conditioning may be an answer in those cases, yes.
So there was an indication in what Ed Miliband said today that they're looking at so-called dual-use heat pumps. In other words, heat pumps which don't only warm up a house during the winter but can also cool it down in the summer. That's the kind of thing you'd welcome.
Air-to-air heat pumps, which are reversible, which can work in both directions, is certainly a possibility. They're not as efficient as heat pumps, which only do heating. So again, that's a reason why you'd want to be careful about where you support people putting them in. You don't want the whole country to adopt them. But yes, that may well be a solution we should be adopting.
More trees in all urban areas?
And more green space in urban areas is a win-win in terms of climate adaptation, because we're going to get more rainfall in the winter. We're going to get more heavy rainfall that can cause surface water flooding. In our cities and our towns and cities, that water has to have somewhere to go. The more green space we have and the more trees we have, it gives some of that water somewhere to go. But of course, in the summer, it provides shade, and the transpiration helps to cool the atmosphere and to some extent reduce the urban heat island effect. So absolutely more green space, and particularly to enable those people in those flats to get out and take exercise even when it's quite hot, because they can find shade and it's pleasant to be there.
We've mentioned older people. What about children?
Well, one of the things I find very strange is that we make children do their most important exams for some of them, which actually determine an awful lot about their earning potential and their career path. We make them do them in summer, parts of the summer that are getting hotter and hotter. Many of them take them in school halls and gyms with big plate glass windows. We know people's cognitive ability goes down when it gets very hot. We know people's efficiency, people's productivity goes down. So should we not be thinking about changing the school year so that we aren't putting kids through exams at that most uncomfortable time?
Makes a lot of sense to me. Now, a moment ago you mentioned the southeast, and I know this is a kind of huge simplification, but still, in general, the west of this country gets more rain than the east. The east is drier. Do you think we have to start collecting more water in the west and pumping it or channeling it to the east?
We have to do more to move water about, absolutely, because, as you say, some places are wetter than others. But we also need to be supporting farmers to do more on-farm water storage, because it's going to get wetter in the winter in the east as well. So when we have the rain, we need to
keep hold on to it.
Absolutely, it's very valuable.
And looking forward, do you think we're going to be growing different kinds of crops and using farmland differently as a result of climate change?
Well, we're already seeing that again in the southeast, in places like Kent, where we're seeing the French champagne houses becoming interested in and indeed buying up land because it's becoming too hot and too dry to grow their grapes in France. We're seeing them being able to grow soft fruits and peaches and things like that. So yes, I think farmers will have to start to be thinking about what are the crops they can grow in the conditions they now see.
Final couple of questions. We're heading towards August, traditionally even hotter than where we are now. Do you think it's a bit silly that we all try and work through August? Well, not all of us, but many people try and work through August. We keep the economy going. The French and other countries basically leave the big cities in August. Do you think we should be beginning to do the same?
I'm not sure about that one. I haven't thought about that one. But I do think we may need to be more continental in terms of thinking about the times of the day that we work. There are crucial construction projects, and you can provide a certain degree of shading and even water misting for people working on hot construction sites. But perhaps actually we should be working very early in the morning and later into the night and not working during those very, very hot periods in the middle of the day.
Well, of course, lots of people love the idea of a siesta, thinking it's just a little bit of a rest. But the other side of the siesta is you go back to work at 7 in the evening and you carry on until 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock.
Absolutely, yes.
So perhaps that's what we'll be. We do that at LBC, of course, anyway. Baroness Brown, thank you very much indeed for talking to me.
Thank you.
Well, listening to that is Professor Liz Bentley, the Chief Executive of the Royal Meteorological Society. Professor Bentley, thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight. Now, you've heard that, and you've heard comments about we may be heading towards 40 degrees, and Ed Miliband in the House of Commons talking about devastating effects on our wildlife. Do you think any of this is hype? You're a meteorologist. You've got the overview. Is it hype, or is that where we're heading?
No, that is where we're heading. And what's really useful about this report that comes out every year, it looks at what's actually happened. So these aren't projections of what's going to happen in the future. This is highlighting how our climate has already changed. And we are seeing this last decade in particular significant changes, particularly in those extremes, rainfall extremes and the high temperature extremes as well.
Now, in terms of the politics of this, there's an awful lot of people in the country who simply don't want to believe that climate change is happening and who say it's net stupid zero, don't want to think about it. What are the consequences of that kind of behaviour if we keep burying our head in the increasingly dry sand?
Yeah, so we'll end up going in the direction we have been going for the last decade. So temperatures will continue to rise. The number of extremes, these heat wave events, will become more frequent. They'll happen for a more longer period of time. They'll become more persistent and they'll be more intense. So we'll see much more record-breaking temperatures like the 40 degrees we saw a couple of years ago. Those will become much more normal. This is a new norm that we're living in, but it will continue to change. So what we've got now in a few decades' time will actually be seen as quite a cool summer. At the moment, it's still quite extreme, but it'll just continue in that direction. And heavier rainfall events will continue. They'll become more extreme, and we'll flip-flop between these really extreme drought conditions that we've got at the moment and then the intense rainfall. So, yeah, famine and feast, I think, for rainfall on the way as well.
Well, particularly for a pale-skinned Scot, that is a horrific thought. Can I ask, there's so many aspects of this, can I ask a bit about the housing stock? Because an awful lot of, many of our big cities, built on clay and other kinds of soil, and that soil itself dries out, and that can then affect, the stability of our housing.
Yeah, that's right. So droughts lead to subsidence of the ground and obviously problems for buildings on clay soils in particular. But our houses are built to keep us warm in winter. They're not built to keep us cool in summer. So we do need to learn from our friends on the continent, particularly in the Mediterranean, about how to keep our houses cool. We need ventilation. But if you think, again, we picked up there, in the Mediterranean countries, they put the blinds up, they'll close the curtains, they shut the windows and the doors when the peak heat and the peak sunshine is during the day. And then they open things up at night to let fresher air in. In the UK, we're very different. We have this kind of mentality of the sun comes out, we open the winds, we open the doors, we invite that heat into our houses. And the house is very good at retaining that heat. So we do need to think behavioural change about what we can do differently.
And what about Lady Brown's suggestion that we need to start to take siestas and work later in the evenings? Those kind of, shifts to the working day.
So I think quite possibly, particularly for those working outdoors, I think that is quite sensible, because to work in the middle of the afternoon, any time between, say, kind of 2 and 4 o'clock, where the intense heat is, that can be draining, it can be life-threatening for certain people. So for those working outdoors, that might be a possibility that we have to stop work during the middle of the afternoon and then pick up again in the evening when the temperature starts to drop away again.
Final thought, really. I was lucky enough to go to Wimbledon last week. And it was fantastic, but, play was stopped 2 or 3 times by people conking out because of the heat. They just couldn't stand it. Something similar happened with the cricket at Lord's. Do you think we're going to have to start to think about when our big sporting moments come and stop putting them at the hottest time of the year?
Well, or how to deal with the heat when it's there. The same for Ascot, the same for festivals. I know Glastonbury Festival was the
Glastonbury.
same. You get lots of people outside in that intense heat. We really need to think about how we keep them cool. So there need to be spaces within those sporting arenas or festivals where you can go and cool off, where you can get water to take on to keep people hydrated. So maybe not moving it to a different time of year, but actually thinking about how we look after people when they're there.
So much to think about. Professor Bentley, thanks so much for talking to me. Now then, up next, Trump is threatening tariffs against Russia if there is no deal on the Ukraine war in the next 50 days. Is the Trump-Putin bromance really done? We'll talk about that next. But the time now, 6:15.
LBC. Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
6:17. Right, let's turn to one of the big breaking stories of the day, the shift in rhetoric and probably policy, as Donald Trump provides American weapon systems to Ukraine, paid for, I should say, by you and by other European citizens, not by the US. Let's hear first the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, on the significance of what's just happened.
It will mean that Ukraine can get its hands on really massive numbers of military equipment, both for air defense, but also missiles, ammunition, etc., etc. So if I was Vladimir Putin today and hear you speaking about what you were planning to do in 50 days and this announcement, I would reconsider whether I should not take negotiations about Ukraine more seriously than I was doing at the moment, if I was Vladimir Putin. But when I'm Ukraine, I think this is really great news.
Now, this is fundamentally happening very much because the White House, hoping for a great, quick peace deal with best friend Vladimir Putin, has been disappointed.
We are very unhappy, I am, with Russia, but we'll discuss that maybe a different day. But we're very, very unhappy with them, and we're going to be doing very severe tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. Tariffs at about 100%. You'd call them secondary tariffs. You know what that means. And I'm disappointed in President Putin because I thought we would have had a deal 2 months ago, but it doesn't seem to get there.
Well, Lieutenant General Ben Hodges served as commanding general for the US Army in Europe. Did he think this is a moment of real change in Trump's attitude to Putin, or just the latest twist in what has been a very twisty and turny relationship?
I wish I could be more optimistic, but I just remain a skeptic until I see actual delivery of real capabilities. It's been mystifying and frustrating for so many people, it's obviously the Ukrainians, to see what could be done and yet hasn't been done. It does feel a little bit more substantive this time, given all the other noise around it, with Secretary General Rutte visiting the White House this afternoon or today, Senator Graham being so vocal about the sanctions. It feels a little bit more, but I'll only believe it when I see it.
And in your assessment, after these huge missile and drone attacks on Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities. What are the priorities for Ukraine if they were able to go with a shopping list, as it were, to the White House, and that shopping list was cashed? Is it the Patriot missiles above all they need?
Well, Patriot is a terrific system, but it won't do anything to help them against drones. Patriot knocks down enemy aircraft and missiles, ballistic missiles, but you're not going to launch a Patriot interceptor against drones. And it's the hundreds of drones every night that are causing the problem. So Patriot is a part of the solution, but as most of your listeners will know, air and missile defense requires a layered system that can address all the different types of threats. I think equally important will be if the United States supports providing long-range precision strike capability that can reach the places that either manufacture Russian drones or the air bases from which the Russian Air Force takes off to launch its missiles against Ukraine. So that long-range precision could also be significant if there's enough.
Yeah. So we should be looking tonight to see if there are so-called offensive weapons as well as purely defensive ones. Let me ask you about whether you think Vladimir Putin has overplayed or misplayed his hand with Donald Trump, because whatever happens, it's pretty clear the American president is really, really angry with him and feels that he's been made a fool of.
I think you said it better than I could. My hope all along has been that President Trump would finally realize that he was being played and that he would get so angry about that and feel betrayed by his friend Vladimir, who speaks so nicely to him, that he would do something about it. President Trump has had enormous potential leverage to use from the beginning, but he would never use it. And I'm talking about not just the provision of weapons and ammunition, but maybe more importantly, the economic pressure that could be brought to bear on Russia's oil and gas export business through supporting the disruption of these shadow fleet vessels moving through the Baltic Sea and Black Sea that take oil to India and China, the Russian frozen assets, and other things that would affect Russia's ability to continue to get revenue. About $240 million a day just from the oil they export to India and China. That's what's at stake.
Such a lot could be done if there was the will to do it. Let me ask you a little bit about relations between NATO and the White House, because it's been a very rocky story. But with Mr. Rutte back in the White House again, clearly has a very good relationship with Donald Trump, a good personal relationship based around the Gulf and all the rest of it. This notion that NATO will pay for the American armaments going to Ukraine, do you think that is a new stage in relations between the US and the Western European members of NATO? In other words, a new kind of deal that going forward that could be quite positive?
Of course, it won't be NATO itself, but nations that are in NATO, like UK, France, Germany, whoever, that might purchase American manufactured systems, knowing that they are going to be handed over to the Ukrainians. But I think Secretary General Rutte deserves credit for a lot of this progress. Now, he got a lot of criticism, deservedly, for the way he behaved around President Trump during the summit. But at the end of the day, what matters most is the security of all of our citizens inside the alliance, as well as helping Ukraine defeat Russia. And so I think Secretary General Rutte deserves some credit for that.
2025 has been a hard year for Ukraine. As a result of this change in tone from Washington, do you think it's a moment of guarded optimism, perhaps the beginning of a turn?
I would say it's been a much harder year for Russia than it has been for Ukraine. You're right, especially Ukrainian civilians have suffered terribly, especially in the last few weeks. But despite all the advantages, Russia has failed to make any significant progress in Ukraine. They've lost hundreds of thousands of casualties for precious little gain on the ground. Their economy is in big trouble, and there are increasing reports coming from Russian military bloggers complaining about morale, about corruption, about all the things. So you do have, and maybe this is me because I want to believe this, but I see so much more noise about things going badly inside Russia.
Very, very interesting indeed. Great pleasure to have you on the show, General Hodges. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you for the privilege.
It is rare for children to be quite so much in the news as they are at the moment. There's a big row over reforms to special educational needs, with MPs worried it's another example of cuts first, vulnerable families second. There's a bigger row ahead about the two-child benefit cap. Scrapping it would lift huge numbers of children out of poverty, but ministers say the money's not there. And finally, after a child dies with measles in Liverpool, there's a lot of concern about the fall in vaccination numbers right around the country. Somebody who can just discuss all of these things is Dame Rachel de Souza, the Children's Commissioner for England, who joins me now. Rachel, it's great to have you in the studio. Let's take those in order. The SEND, or the Special Educational Needs row, this is something that is beginning to bubble up. Can you just explain to people what you think the government might be getting wrong?
So, look, this is an ongoing problem. The 214 reforms put in these EHCPs, Education Health Care Plans, and if you can get one of those, if you've got a child with special educational needs, you can get support for your child.
But they're quite hard to get, aren't they?
And more so, that the problem is the numbers of people applying for them have just become huge. So that the EH...
And sorry, is that partly because if your child has got one, that's a kind of advantage on my child to get one if possible? There's a kind of competition for them?
Do you know, I actually think it's something else. I think right across the English-speaking world, we've seen a massive uptick in diagnoses of autism and neurodiversity. And so the numbers of children with very complex special needs has changed the same. That's what has stayed the same. That's what EHCPs were set up for, about 4% of our children. It's bad enough that they're having to go through this process every year, but that's who it was set up for. But the huge increase in people needing it are children with been diagnosed with neurodiversity, so autism. You're seeing a lot more of it. Now, I've just been to Canada, just been to America, exactly the same there.
Do we know why?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. I have been leaning hard on the CMO, the Chief Medical Officers, and others to say, hey, what are your paediatricians doing? You're diagnosing, often children are diagnosing themselves off the internet. You're diagnosing all these children. What is the evidence base? Because once you get a diagnosis like that, it's for life. So a child's getting a lifelong diagnosis. And the answer back I'm getting is the evidence base isn't clear. Now, that's one bit that needs to
really
be sorted out in these reforms. But we also, we need, one of the reasons it's such a big problem is there is such low trust in the system. So parents feel, they have to fight and have an adversarial approach to get their EHCP. The first thing the government needs to say, and they need to do this straight away, is to come out and say nobody's going to get their EHCP taken off them, and we are not going to cut support for any child. If you did that, you could start, and you must do that, because otherwise you'd be in legal
you take
challenge.
the anger and the suspicion out of the whole debate.
And then,
so why are they not doing that?
Well, I don't know. And then the discussion needs to be, how can we create a system that really works for everyone, that asks the question, how can we help you, not how can we diagnose you? So when I talk to children, and as you know, I talk to hundreds of thousands of them, they say to me, we don't want labels. We want to be in our local school. And instead, we've got burgeoning special schools. We've got children being given, parents fighting for these diagnoses to get help. And we've got to change this. It's just not working.
Such a huge issue, Rachel. Let me turn on to another huge issue, which is the two-child cap, which limits benefits to 2 children. You can't get any extra benefits if you have more. Now, people we've talked to over the years in the show say again and again that lifting that cap, getting rid of it, may be expensive, but it's the single most effective way of lifting hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty.
Absolutely right. And let me tell you why it's so important. I've just been doing a piece of work for the Government's Poverty Commission, looking at children in dire poverty. We have 1 million more children in poverty. We have about 1 million in dire poverty.
Michael Marr would call destitution.
Look, a couple of miles down the road from here, I met a little boy who's basically was ashamed because he couldn't have his friends round because a rat bit his face in the middle of the night. He's living in rat-infested, mouldy homes. A little boy, 8-year-old boy, who has to curl up in his bed because his bed's not big enough. A little girl who has to walk 90 minutes home through, criminal and drug-infested parks with no lights. That's how children experience poverty. That's what they tell me. Now, the single most effective and efficient thing we can do is to lift the 2-child cap. It's absolutely straightforward. It's not disputed. And as Children's Commissioner, I'm going to say, children are watching this. Children did my Big Ambition survey before the election, and only 1 in 5 of them felt government listened to them. And they had high hopes for this government. And they want to see those hopes that realised. They need to see this.
And if you're looking for ways to pay for it, perhaps treat pensioners a little bit less generously.
Look, I don't want to sort of trade these things off against each other, but frankly,
money has to come in somewhere.
Children have a really important case, and it is going to mean lifelong effects if we don't do it. We've got children who are tiny because they're not eating. I was in Cumbria recently, kids with having to travel on bus journeys of 2.5 hours just to get 13 miles down the road because the infrastructure is so poor. We've got to support the kids.
Very, very important. Now, one other thing which can cause lifelong problems, of course, is disease. We've had a child die in Alderhay Hospital in Liverpool of measles, which hasn't happened in this country for quite a while. And I've looked at the vaccination rates, and all around the country, they're going down and down.
Shocking. Absolutely shocking. I mean, the first thing I'd do is urge any parent to vaccinate their child. We should not lose any child to the failure of these very effective, very safe vaccines. But a couple of things I would say. One, stop believing the disinformation online. If you need information, go speak to your local surgery and go look at the NHS.
Would you like to see social media companies do more to kind of combat the disinformation?
My goodness. I mean, I think we need to give social media companies a big kick to actually help any of our children.
Kick on the bottom, absolutely.
What are they doing? They should be taking down these lies and conspiracy theories and sorting it out. It's ridiculous. And I call them in every 6 months. I'm going to add that to my list. The other thing we could practically do is actually encourage our schools to be centres for vaccinations. They do that a bit, and we could do a bit more of that, I think.
Dame Rachel de Souza, Children's Commissioner for England. One day I'll invite you onto the show and you'll tell me what you really think. But for now, thank you very, very much indeed. The MasterChef presenter Greg Wallace has said he is deeply sorry as 45 claims of inappropriate behaviour against him are upheld. I'll be speaking with a former MasterChef contestant and broadcaster who tried to flag his behaviour years ago. Time now, 6:31, and Amelia Cox has your news headlines.
A couple have been found guilty of killing their newborn baby while on the run from authorities. 38-year-old Constance Martin and Mark Gordon, who's 51, have been convicted of gross negligence manslaughter. A retired United States Army officer has told LBC he'll believe it when he sees it after Donald Trump promised to send weapons to help Ukraine. Ben Hodges has been speaking on Tonight with Andrew Marr after the US president announced he'll send top-of-the-line capabilities to NATO. And 3 men have been arrested in connection with the murder of a man stabbed outside a luxury hotel in central London. Blue Stevens was killed in Knightsbridge last week. LBC weather becoming dry tonight in many eastern and southern areas. Some showers lingering in parts of western Britain. Lows of 8 degrees.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast with Tom Swarbrick on LBC.
Middle-class workers will face higher taxes this year, according to a report by The Telegraph citing comments of the Transport Secretary. Darren Jones, Chief Secretary to the Treasury and Labour MP for Bristol North West, unfreezing income tax threshold bans, as the Chancellor said. She said it would hurt working people to keep those frozen, and those working people going to be protected by unfreezing.
Beyond the manifesto commitment, everything else is what we would call tax speculation, which is you'd expect me.
The Chancellor said in the House of Commons that it will hurt working people. Why can't you repeat that promise?
Nick Ferrari at breakfast with Tom Swarbrick. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio, on Global Player and the new LBC app. This is LBC. Message Andrew Marr on WhatsApp now on 0345 6060 973.
6:35. Well, it wasn't just once or twice. The inquiry into the behaviour of Greg Wallace, for so long the BBC MasterChef host, has upheld 45 allegations against him, including one of unwelcome physical contact and 3 of being in a state of undress. Although most of the claims were about inappropriate sexual language and behaviour, there were charges of racism as well. Mr. Wallace, you may recall, has blamed much of this on his neurodiversity, saying he was unable to wear underpants because of his autistic hypersensitivity to labels and tight clothing. Well, it takes all sorts, but it also makes us ask yet again whether some media figures get away with misbehaviour for years because their bosses reckon they're too good for business, too good to lose. Let's talk to Aasmah Mir, an LBC colleague who used to work with Mr. Wallace. Aasmah, you have your own experience of him. Just tell us about that.
Well, I went on MasterChef in 2017. And, I was incredibly excited. I thought this is going to be a great thing to do. I had a young child at the time, and it was, it was a kind of distraction. It was something really looking forward to.
A lot of fun. Yeah.
Exactly. And I was a fan of the programme. So you don't get to meet the presenters beforehand. They're kept separate from you, probably because they want to introduce a bit of kind of jeopardy and all the rest of it. So I cooked my first dish. I think it was some kind of noodle dish, can't remember. And I put it down in front of John Turode and Greg Wallace. And then they kind of cut and they were going to reframe the shot. And in the meantime, it was a bit awkward. We're just kind of standing around. And Greg Wallace said to me, "Oh, do you work at Radio 4? And at the time I did. And I thought, oh, that's very nice of him. He's breaking the ice, putting me at my ease. And I said, yes, I do. And he said, do you know this person? I said, yes, I do. I know her. And then he said, tell her from me, and don't worry, I'm not going to use the language. He said, tell her from me. And I thought he would say, tell her from me hi or something. He said, tell her from me she's a sexy, and then a word that rhymes with witch. And I was ever so slightly flabbergasted. Nobody said anything. John Turode's face didn't change. And I did that thing that predominantly women, but not only women do, which is I just kind of laughed awkwardly because there was silence. And I remember thinking, this is very odd. What's going on? Why are they using that kind of language? But you're in a very weird environment where, I'm a presenter, but I'm not a presenter anywhere near the scale of, Greg Wallace and John Turode. And they're very much kind of like the gods. And so you just kind of don't really know what to do. So I just kind of went back to my station, continued, cooked a few more things, spoke to a couple of colleagues, and they just kind of shrugged, oh, what can you do? He's a bit like that. And then I left the show. But then I did meet up with some other people afterwards who told me about the rape joke that was told by Greg Wallace, which I'm not sure if that's been upheld, but I have emails where that is acknowledged by people within Baroness and the BBC, and he apologised for that when he realised that it had upset people. And then I stewed away for a while, Andrew. I didn't know what to do. I thought, what do I complain? It looks like sour grapes. Or do I just leave it? And I waited about 6 months. And then before it aired, I sent the email to say this happened and it's really bad and it's eaten away at me. And please don't let this happen again. And I was told it won't happen again. But it did.
It did. It just leads me to think again and again, this is not the only story of its kind, to say the least, if only it were. And they, you run from sort of Russell Brand and you go way, way back to really, really gross things like Jimmy Savile, and you have much less serious ones, perhaps, like the famous Jeremy Clarkson punch. But again and again, you get very, very famous, very successful national figure presenters who at some point become too big to sack, too big to chastise, too big to put back in their box.
Very much so. And I mean, I've worked in broadcasting for, 30 years now. And every place I've worked, there's always one person who and it's a spectrum basically where they're kind of like this troubled genius, but they're a genius, therefore you forgive them their weird behavior, or they're mercurial, or they're a bit strange, they're eccentric.
Or now they're neurodiverse.
Well, and the thing is that I think he clearly is, isn't he? I mean, he says he's been diagnosed, and I do feel that Banerjee, at that time Endemol Shine, as I knew them, they had eyes on Greg Wallace every day during every production. Should they not have noticed something? Should they not have said something? Because I don't know how much the BBC knew about what was going on.
Aasmah, that's absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for talking to me. Because listening to that and reflecting on another judgment going against the BBC today over their Gaza documentary is Dorothy Burn, the former head of news and current affairs at Channel 4, now running Murray Edwards College at Cambridge. Dorothy, great to have you on the show. First of all, your reflection on this rather sad story about Greg Wallace and how long it's gone on for.
Well, it's gone on for about 20 years. And actually, I would point out that the BBC has admitted in the report that it had 6 different complaints itself about him. So this is a story about the BBC, but it could as well be a story about several other broadcasters. I suffered this while I worked at ITV. This sort of terrible behaviour has been accepted in broadcasting for decades. One of the problems has been that people have thought that presenters were too big to sack. But actually, that isn't true. With MasterChef, the star is not Greg Wallace, it's MasterChef. And we've seen with other really successful programmes like Have I Got News for You, where when, for whatever reason, they changed the presenter, the programme carried on being very strong. So these
I can remember, I can just remember Angus Dayton going and everyone said, well, that's the end of Have I Got News for You? And that was, 20 years ago?
Yeah,
and it's carried on since.
We should be clear, I don't think the complaint about him was of the same sort of nature as of Greg Wallace. But yes, that programme is going strong and now has successful Have I Got News for You in other countries. These so-called brilliant presenters, I don't wish to be rude to you, Andrew, but you're just presenters.
No one's ever called me brilliant. You're all right,
We can get
Boris.
another one. And
there's always another one waiting. I'm all too aware of that. LBC will be listening, so be very, very careful. Let me move hurriedly on to the other story, which I think is more serious in many ways, which is the BBC documentary on Gaza, where this really hangs on the fact that the production company paid the young presenter, the child presenter, a fee, and this boy was the son of a Hamas official, and some of the money seems to have gone to Hamas. Now, that would be a criminal offence to pay Hamas, but what do you think generally about the idea of paying people who are contributing to factual, news-based documentaries anyway?
I think we should be clear here that the BBC report has found that the problem was that the child narrator was the son of a Hamas official, and therefore shouldn't have been the narrator. And even if he was, the audience should have been told. I don't think that actually any significant sum was paid to him. If somebody is narrating a film, I think that's a separate piece of work and it's fine to pay them. But no child of whosever child they were should have been narrating a film about Gaza. Ofcom guidance is clear that children should only be asked to do things which are within their competence and knowledge. And in that programme, that child was giving us statistics about the history and geography of Gaza. And clearly, he did not write that commentary, and he should never have been narrating it. I think the serious problem for the BBC here is that one person, at least in the BBC, asked, was there any connection with Hamas? and they did not receive an answer to their question. And their excuse has been, well, we asked the question and the production company didn't give us the answer. I commissioned programmes at Channel 4 for 20 years, and if I asked you a question and you didn't give me the answer to a very important question like that, I wouldn't have put the programme out. The BBC has said that one problem was that there were 2 commissioning editors and it wasn't clear who was responsible. Hilariously, the answer the BBC has come up with is there's now going to be another person employed at goodness knows what cost, who will be the director of long-form programmes. So there's another person to dilute responsibility.
And yet again, lessons learned, and of course, no heads roll, and the caravan moves on. Very sad. Dorothy Burn, thank you very much indeed. Now, returning to one of our top stories tonight, Putin really surprised a lot of people. He talks nice and then he bombs everybody in the evening. So there's a little bit of a problem there. I don't like it. Thus, Donald Trump on the Russian president yesterday. Now, we might be a little picky. We might say the people of Ukraine aren't surprised because they've lived with this for years. We might say they see it as more than a little bit of a problem. But let's not split hairs. What's clearly happened is that Vladimir Putin has badly overplayed his hand. Is this a misstep or a serious miscalculation from the Russian president? Let's talk now to Sir Bill Browder, the anti-corruption campaigner and head of the Global Magnitsky Justice Campaign, who, after falling out with Putin, was himself deported and declared a threat to Russian national security. Bill, thank you very much for coming on this show. I'm really interested in your reading of Putin and all of this, because he must have known that Trump is mercurial and difficult, and he was flattering him and sending him a lovely oil portrait of himself and all the rest of it until recently, but carrying on the war as before. Do you think he's miscalculated?
Well, so far he's calculated perfectly from his own perspective. Nothing has happened to him as a result of continuing the war. If you remember, during the presidential campaign, Trump said he was going to end the war in 24 hours. Of course, that didn't happen.
Indeed.
And then there was a demand for an unconditional 30-day ceasefire from both sides. The Ukrainians said yes. Putin said nothing. Trump, at various points, made all sorts of statements. At the very beginning of his presidency, he said, if Putin doesn't negotiate, there will be tariffs, taxes, and sanctions. None of those have happened. And so from an objective perspective, so far, Putin is sitting in the catbird seat. He's doing well. Yeah. He's carrying on with his war, and it doesn't seem to be having any real world consequences coming from Donald Trump.
The catbird seat's a good expression, but also you say so far. The question really isn't it whether the scales are finally falling from Donald Trump's eyes, and if he is, as one of the Republicans said, really pissed with Putin at the moment and is changing policy. He's now threatening heavy tariffs if Putin doesn't end the war within 50 days. Maybe this is the moment when he finally changes direction.
Well, it would be nice if that were the case, but if you can look back at all these things, you'll see that Trump has made all sorts of statements about days and weeks and months when it came to tariffs. He's got all sorts of deadlines that he doesn't hold up to. And so I would strongly reserve judgment on Trump turning against Putin at this moment in time. It doesn't look like that has happened, and we will see in 50 days. It would be good if he finally did. But the only thing that really happened today is Trump then resumed the supply of defensive weapons that he had cut off about 3 weeks ago. And he didn't just resume them. He said, we will supply them to other NATO members who buy them for Ukraine. And so I don't think that this is some kind of 180-degree turn of Donald Trump. What I think this is a more of this rope-a-dope game that's being played where nothing is really happening. Everyone is saying different things, but Putin carries on with his murderous bombing campaign every night of Ukraine.
Well, there is a douse of cold water for us all. It reminds me of the phrase taco, Trump always caves over time. And this may be yet another example of that. Sir Bill Browder, thank you very much for talking to me tonight. Coming up, The numbers of ladybirds in the UK have been soaring in recent weeks, and we'll be speaking to a ladybird expert in just a few minutes to find out why. But the time now, 6:50.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
By ramping up both the rhetoric on Ukraine and providing missile systems which can reach Moscow, is Donald Trump finally doing the right thing or going well over the top?
Ian Dale on LBC. Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:51. The story of Constance Martin, the royal-connected aristocrat, and Mark Gordon, who'd served 20 years for rape in the United States, is outlandish. They had 4 children taken into care by social services as unfit parents before they went on the run with their new baby Victoria, camping out and living in food from bins in early 2023 to avoid the authorities. And by doing so, they let the baby die. Earlier in the day, they were found guilty of gross negligence manslaughter. Let's hear more from LBC's Helen Hoddinot. Helen.
So, Andrew, baby Victoria's death has today been called totally avoidable, with the people who were supposed to keep her safe, her parents, repeatedly failing to do so. In January 2023, 38-year-old Constance Martin and 51-year-old Mark Gordon, who met about a decade ago, went on the run with their baby to get away from social services, and that's after their 4 other children were taken into care. While they were on the run, a driver called Ken Hudson unwittingly offered them a lift. He's thought to be the only person to have had contact with the baby.
Just as I'm walking back to my van, I put my hand on top of the baby's head and I just said, God bless. Now, if I hadn't have touched the baby's head, maybe I wouldn't have felt the way I felt.
Well, the couple were eventually arrested after 54 days of a nationwide police search, and officers in the footage of that arrest can be repeatedly heard asking them where their baby is, while Mark Gordon can be heard asking for food.
Where is your child?
Where's your child, my friend?
My food, please.
In a minute, where's your child? Where's your child?
Food?
In a minute, where's your child?
2 days later, baby Victoria's decomposed body was found inside a shopping bag covered with rubbish in a corner of a disused shed on an allotment in Brighton. Prosecutors said she died from hypothermia or was smothered while co-sleeping in a freezing tent on the South Downs. Now, the verdict today spells the end of what has been an extraordinary legal process, with the judge at one point accusing the pair of trying to sabotage their own retrial. Speaking outside the court today, Met Detective Superintendent Lewis Bassford said the couple had caused issues at every opportunity.
Both defendants made repeated attempts to disrupt and frustrate the judicial process, employing tactics designed to undermine proceedings and shift the focus away from the serious charges that they faced.
Now, the couple gave no response today and also refused to stand up in court as the verdict was read out. They'll be sentenced in September.
A bizarre, deeply distressing story, Helen. Thank you very much indeed for that. The time now, 6:54. And finally, back to the weather. From the cricket at Lord's to sunbathers at the seaside, everywhere there have been swarms of ladybirds. And the correct term for that, by the way, is a loveliness of ladybirds, which is rather nice. But why so many of them? Let's talk now to Professor Helen Roy, ecologist and ladybird expert at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. Helen, Professor Roy, we have lots of people have reported from all around the country huge numbers of ladybirds, and they've said it with great surprise. Should we be surprised?
Well, insect numbers can go up and down on a year-by-year basis, and ladybirds are no exception to that. So some people might remember back in the mid-1970s when there were huge numbers of 7-spot ladybirds and 11-spot ladybirds. So we're just seeing part of that kind of natural process of fluctuation, but it's been caused by the amazing weather that we've had and the fantastic number of greenfly, little aphids that have been around for those of our ladybirds that like to feed on them.
So hot weather, relatively hot and dry weather produces greenfly. Greenfly produce ladybirds.
Absolutely. And coupled with that, the warm weather allows the ladybirds to go through their life cycle very, very fast. And people will be aware of the life cycle of butterflies from egg to caterpillar, and then the chrysalis and the adult. And the ladybirds follow a very similar process. But when the weather's warmer, they go through that very, very rapidly. And so there's a lot of adults around at the moment.
And who are the predators for ladybirds? I hate to say this, poor ladybirds, but they must have some predators. And will we see an increase in them?
Ladybirds have some amazing parasites, so they don't get that many predators. So some birds will feed on ladybirds when they're feeding on the wing, but actually ladybirds taste really horrible. They're red and they're black and they're warning predators that actually we don't taste very nice at all. But some little parasites really take advantage of them, and they're absolutely fascinating in their own right as well.
They are, of course, famously the bug we all love. But what about other bugs? What about butterflies and so on? Are we going to see big increases in those because of the warm weather as well?
It would depend on the combination of factors that each of those insects need. And, we may well see some other insects doing extremely well as well through this weather. And we'll certainly see some of the other ladybirds. And what's really amazing is that people all across the country are sending in their sightings of various plants and animals through the iRecord platform. And that gives us these really amazing data sets to ask lots of exciting scientific questions. And the UK Ladybird Survey is just part of that big citizen science initiative.
Well, I don't want to end on a down note, but presumably very hot weather has bad effects for some creatures, some bugs. Who does badly out of a really hot summer?
I think it's really important for all of the insects that we look after them throughout the year. And, there's no doubt that, for example, if the greenfly numbers start to wane a little bit, then all of these ladybirds are going to be very, very hungry. And so it's really important that in people's gardens that they look after those greenfly that may actually be starting to disappear a little bit at the moment because we've got so many very hungry ladybirds about. But people can nurture those aphids and those little greenfly on their roses and bean plants, and also then start preparing with some little shallow dishes of water, perhaps with some stones for the insects to sit on and have a little bit of water when it's getting really hot.
Well, that's a nice thought. I can hear people all around the country wondering whether they can go out and make little greenfly pies and leave them for the ladybirds. It's a very nice thought. Thank you so much indeed, Professor Roy. The government's being urged to drop the 2-child benefit cap as the number of children in poverty continues to grow. I spoke a bit earlier with the Children's Commissioner, Rachel de Souza, earlier in the show, and she gave the government this warning.
Now, the single most effective and efficient thing we can do is to lift the 2-child cap. It's absolutely straightforward. It's not disputed. And as Children's Commissioner, I'm going to say children are watching this.
Not that I'm campaigning, but I'll be back with you tomorrow. If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. Download now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 10 on LBC, it's Henry Riley. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.
Thanks, Andrew. Donald Trump seems to have finally seen the Ukrainian light and has overtly criticised President Putin, as well as announcing that he's happy to arm Ukraine up to the hilt as long as NATO members pay for these weapons. He also wants to impose secondary sanctions on countries that are trading with Russia in a bid to crash their economy. But will he stick to it? By ramping up both the rhetoric and providing missile systems which can reach Moscow, is Donald Trump finally doing the right thing or going well over the top? On Cross Question at 8, Labour MP Polly Billington, Conservative Shadow Welsh Secretary Mims Davis, documentary maker